everyone, and welcome to This Is Why We Fight. I'm Jo.
And I'm Jordan.
Hello, good evening all. Yes, it's another episode of Let's Talk About, and this one's going to be slightly different, a bit of a heavier topic, but one that needs addressing.
It's not so much a heavier topic as a slightly more ranty topic.
Yeah, it's
more of an angry topic.
It's definitely going to be ranty. So we're going to talk about the appalling behaviour of the police and these little jumped up.
Listening to you try and navigate this minefield of things you can say and things you can't say is rather enjoyable.
I don't like swearing, and I'm trying desperately not to. These people are like parking wardens.
No, they're worse.
Who've gone nuts with power. They are hypocrites. They seemingly unaware of the laws that they're trying to enforce, except for this particular one. As many of you will know, there was a recent vote by MPs on whether or not the inalienable right of peaceful protest should continue. And living in the truly utopian Western democracies that we do, you will of course know that that right has been protected. No, of course it hasn't. Of course it hasn't. So that's no longer a thing. And freedom, I suppose, comes with a price. But it can also be lost very easily. And a lot of people have sacrificed their freedoms for security. And that never works, by the way, because the security supposedly comes from the people who have taken your freedoms. There's no security inherent in that.
The main issue is, as soon as you start putting up security as a reason to take away freedoms, you can always continuously say something is unsafe.
Yes.
Or something is dangerous, thereby it needs to be restricted. And it just slowly builds and builds and builds and builds and builds.
Absolutely. Safety has cost us a lot of freedoms. Think about all the legislation that's happened over the last few years in the name of safety, and all the rules that are in place now. Like hate speech laws, and it's just
GCHQ in general.
Yeah, it's never going to end. When something runs its course, something else will come into play that must happen for your safety. And
if it's not one thing, it's another.
And once these people have power, they'll never give it back. Never. Around the same time, of course, MPs are talking about extending, or they've voted on it now, and they've. I don't know how this happened. It's almost like they all want the same thing, but another 6 months of extraordinary powers under COVID legislation. So this is a government that has, I believe, an 80-seat majority, is the phrase being thrown around. Already have that majority. Does anyone remember when Boris was fighting the woke side of Parliament during Brexit? And his hands were tied when he was trying to deliver Brexit, despite this 80-seat majority. And then he shut down Parliament. Does everyone remember that?
No, he didn't have an 80-seat majority then.
Oh, sorry. Apologies.
You got your timetable completely confused. When he did that, he only had like 6 or 4 seats. It was hardly anything at all.
Oh, it's a shame it didn't stay that way. And now, of course, yeah. So it's a shame it didn't stay that way. And he was just stymied, wasn't he? At every turn, he had to shut down Parliament, prorogue Parliament, and he got just blasted for it. Blasted for it by the opposition, who were dead quiet.
You don't hear much of Starmer these days, do you?
Don't hear much of any of them. What about all the mouthy feminists? Where are they? Think about it. Whenever Boris Johnson basically sneezed, he was a fascist and a Nazi. Nazi snot or whatever they want to call it. Everything he did. Oh, the nasty party, the Nazis.
He was Daddy Gammon for quite a long while.
Far right Boris. Far right Boris is trying to take us into some kind of totalitarian nightmare. Do you remember all this from the Labour side of the front benches?
Yeah.
And now he's taken us into a totalitarian nightmare. They're all dead silent.
Yeah, because they're actually quite pleased with the powers they've got. Because they're sitting there thinking, when we're in power, this is going to be quite pleasant. This is one of the issues with the parliamentary system, where it just kind of goes back and forth between between the two parties.
Yeah, they pretend to be on opposite sides. That's all a pantomime, by the way. This left and right side of the benches, they're all on the same side, and that's their side and not your side.
Exactly. They just want a slightly different flavour.
And you can tell this...
The same outcome.
Yeah, and you can tell this by their silence. Everything was a performance.
But whenever there's anything that the government really, really, really wants, it always has unanimous appeal across the board.
Yeah. I remember all that furore over... Jeremy Corbyn. How could I forget his name? When he was telling people to abstain from voting.
I'm just trying... It's funny, you read my mind. I'm just trying to remember what he told them to abstain over.
It was something to do with Brexit. I remember that because people were giving him loads of grief over it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure everyone else remembers that because it was nothing but news for days, probably weeks. And, you know, Corbyn, it was the whip, wasn't it? Wasn't it for MP? No. I'm trying to think. It's something to do with the whip anyway. He basically forced people to vote on Brexit, I think actually was the issue. Where people wanted to abstain and he forced them to vote.
No, it was the other way around. They wanted to vote and he wanted them to abstain.
Oh, either way. Anyway, the point is, they're very noisy when something they actually don't want to happen happens.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they'll tell you they didn't want this to happen after the fact. But the reality is, all of these gobby people who constantly complain about everything Boris Johnson does, where are they now?
Which is a nice little segue into the video, I believe, is it not?
It is. We've got a video we'd like to share with you. So going back to the police real quick. The powers that have been given to the police and the abuse of those powers has been unforgivable.
It's abhorrent.
We know that the police have been entering people's homes on, well, ridiculous excuses. Oh, someone's having a party. It's not a party, it's just me.
No. It's not even that. It's we've been told you're having a party.
Yeah.
There was that Scottish geezer right at the beginning of lockdown. It was just him and his wife, nothing else.
And a friend.
And then there was that... No, there was no friend. No. That was the one that was coming up to next. That was in Essex. That was in Ayley, wasn't it?
Yeah, you liked that one, didn't you? Because he basically told this policewoman to basically leave his home, get off my property. There were a few choice words in there. I'm not going to repeat them, but you can imagine.
No. I think what you mean to say is there were some words in there you can find in the dictionary, and the rest you're not finding in the dictionary. You're finding them in Urban Dictionary.
There are a few words in there that I could repeat, but that wouldn't give you the gist of the conversation. Every other word began with F, so you can guess the rest. It was actually rather amazing to see. May even post the link to that video somewhere. I don't know.
Sure, that was a funny video.
It was hilarious. It was really good to see people standing up for themselves, honestly. But anyway, getting back to the police enforcing the tyranny of the state. Now, let's be clear about this. There will be good police officers, of course. But I'm really struggling to find them when almost every piece of media I see is the police behaving in the way I'm about to show you. It's disgusting. And honestly, there are lots of people are turning against the police, and based on this video, well deserved, I would say, which is
Absolutely.
a real shame. Because, you know, again, this comes down to the breakdown of communities. These police officers don't feel any empathy for us or allegiance to us. They just carry, you know, they're just following orders, right? That's the excuse. That worked before, didn't it? Little Nazis that they are. Anyway, this is incredibly disturbing, this video. In my opinion, you can make up your own mind, see for yourselves. We'll play it now.
Outlined in the may be committing an offence by taking part in this gathering. It is necessary for you to disperse to protect public health. This is a lawful direction to each person in this gathering to disperse and return home. Failure to comply is also an offence, which you may be liable to a fine and or arrest and prosecution. This gathering is not exempt from the restrictions outlined in the regulations. You may be committing an offence by taking part in this gathering. It is necessary for you to disperse to protect public health. This is a lawful direction to each person in this gathering.
And there you have it.
There's so much to pick apart in that video. It's kind of insane how I would say every sentence is its own little dystopian thing. I don't know.
It's damning watching that.
It's unbelievable. We've got to this stage in what, a year? A tiny little bit more than a year. We've gone from everything being normal to the police in their little vans with the radio thing going, saying this gathering is unlawful. If you don't break up, we're going to fine you, and if you resist, we're going to arrest you and prosecute you.
And all this other stuff had to happen, of course, to make this possible. If they'd have just come out and done this, people would have said, what the hell are you talking about?
This is the goal. This, in my opinion, was the goal. Everything else was kind of just a useful little tool or something that they kind of wanted. But this level of control is what they've been desperate for a long while.
So the masks, the COVID cops, the lockdowns, the restrictions on your freedoms, all this legislation, the free speech legislation around your dinner table, all of that, all these little primers, let's say, were put in place so that this would be a continuation of restricted liberties and not just a massive shock that everyone would immediately push back against. I hope people are pushing back. I'm disgusted by this. Do you want to break down the message, Jordan? Because that's quite something, isn't it?
It's really strange how they kept saying the gathering is unlawful and then pointing out that this is a lawful direction. It's one of those tricks of language. By saying it's a lawful direction rather than saying we're ordering you, it kind of is less confrontational, or is meant to appear less confrontational at any rate. They're just nicely asking you to leave.
Do you remember as well, like just going back to Boris, properly going after Boris tonight, sorry about that, Boris. I'm sure you're really hurt and upset by this. Do you remember when we talked about proroguing Parliament and people were talking about there's a difference between illegal and unlawful?
Mm-hmm.
So illegal means something is actually against the law, and unlawful means something is not allowed. It's very interesting that distinction is made.
And they're very, very careful with that.
Yes.
They constantly say things like regulations, for example. Realistically, when's the last regulation you've ever heard come out of the government? I can't think of any. Outside of health and safety regulation and food regulation, stuff like that. Stuff that is actually set forth by a regulatory body. Not actual laws as such. And then COVID comes along and everything is a regulation.
Well, I'm looking up the definitions here of unlawful and illegal. So one of them says that illegal is specifically forbidden, that is, something is against the law, where something unlawful goes against what is allowed. So that's the first one I read out. The second one says unlawful is prohibited, that is not permitted by law, while illegal is contrary to or forbidden by law. So not permitted or forbidden.
It implies that there is a way for it to become permitted. So the way that I would understand that is it is an unlawful thing to do, but if you apply for a license, it's lawful.
Yes, it's arbitrary. There is a way around it.
You just have to behave in a way that they deem acceptable, and then they're going to allow you to go through the door.
here's the third and most important definition of this, and this is the one I find the most interesting. Illegal means that it's forbidden by a law that has been passed. So something that is against the law is illegal. There is no grey area. It's forbidden, right? You do this thing, you pay the penalty. Unlawful, however, means that it's not authorised by law because no such law has been passed. Unlawful means it's outside of the law, according to this definition. So you've got the forbidden, which means we have made a law against it, and you've got unlawful, which means we haven't made a law against it. So we're not saying that it's okay, but we haven't made a law to say it's not. That's why they're using the word unlawful. There is no law that exists to prevent this thing. It is just frowned upon. We do not want you to do it. Now, I don't know exactly, and I wish I'd looked this up beforehand. I may even look this up now. In fact, I'll let you do it. Can you find out whether an actual law exists which forbids public protest? Or is it just guidance? Because they use the word unlawful as opposed to illegal. They would have called it an illegal gathering, I think, if they could.
Yeah, like they do with raves and what have you.
Yeah. But if they're saying it's unlawful, that means there is no law that you are breaking by engaging with it. So,
one minute, you'll be very glad to know that according to askthe.police.uk, under the Human Rights Act, everybody has a free expression and freedom of thought and assembly. Since when?
Is that everyone except anyone in the UK?
Is this anyone apart from people who disagree with what they deem acceptable thought?
That's amazing.
These people. They do my head in.
That's amazing. So it's unlawful then? That is the correct terminology?
I would imagine so. I'm still looking around. It's not the easiest thing to find.
I'm pretty sure if it was illegal, they would just say it's illegal. This is an illegal gathering. Everyone must go home now. That would be the quickest way to make everyone scatter, wouldn't it?
I would imagine so.
If anyone knows better, pop in a comment, please. Correct us if we're wrong. Anyway, back to what we were talking about.
Yeah, back to that video on the coffers.
So let's break down the message. Now that we've covered illegal versus unlawful, we'll find out, I'm sure. I'm sure one of you good people will let us know which it is.
Leave it in the comments below. We'll
please
be able
do.
to see it there.
Okay, so what was the rest of their message?
No, but once again, they mention fining people. And if you resist, they're going to prosecute you, which is kind of interesting.
They talk about fining and prosecution. What kind of government threatens people with fines when they have nothing? When they've been furloughed for a year, or lost their business in the last year, or been unemployed for the last year?
Especially when so many people have been put out of work by the government itself.
While the government has been on a full wage.
It's not as if we've been put out of business because the market has turned. The government has come along and said, right, you're no longer allowed to operate.
You can no longer open your business. And they are still being paid full-time wages while they're doing this to other people.
80%. Sorry. I misunderstood where you were going.
Yeah, sorry. The politicians, the people that make these rules, that you can't run your business, you can't open up.
Didn't they vote to give themselves a pay rise, actually?
Yes, they did.
I thought they did, yeah.
Cheeky so-and-sos. Pay rise, of course.
Absolutely appalling that they've done that.
Well, the government doesn't have any money, does it? So when they talk about a pay rise, what they mean is that you who cannot open your business are paying them a little bit more. Disgusting. Sorry.
No, don't you worry about it. They're just abhorrent. Absolutely appalling.
They also mentioned on that video that this gathering is not exempt. Now that's very interesting. Not exempt. They're having to quantify or qualify the message that they're sending. This gathering is not exempt. Because,
once again, it implies that there is stuff that you are allowed to protest for.
yes.
And we all know what those things will be.
Oh, yes.
They're going to be anything that the government deems relevant. So, for example, the Black Lives Matter protest last year, the Extinction Rebellion protest last year. I would expect us to have them again this summer.
The protest outside that school in Batley for the teacher who showed a picture of the Prophet Muhammad.
Mm-hmm.
Those protests have not been treated with the same contempt as people protesting for their freedoms.
Yeah, because they're not a threat to the government. That's why. That's what this comes down to. As this is going on, more and more it is becoming obvious that the police have been turned into some sort of Praetorian Guard.
Yes.
Where they originally they were meant to be this elite unit there to protect the empire and all of that, and now they've just turned into what is basically the emperor's bodyguards.
Yeah. It's the private security for the state.
Mm-hmm. Ironically, it's the private security which the public purse pays for.
Yes, well, the public purse pays for everything the government does. Let's not forget it. Yeah, just going back to that Batley comment that you made. The government are all for civil unrest. You understand this, dear viewer. As long as it doesn't affect them. Unrest between ourselves, perfectly fine. The people protesting for their freedoms are protesting against the government. There's a big difference between protesting for something that doesn't involve the government and protesting against the government. And what these freedom protests are for is to protest against the government tyranny that we're currently being forced to undergo. And this is why they're going to stamp those out. You are not free to protest. You are not free to tell the government you don't agree with what they're doing. And you're not free to refuse what the government tells you it wants you to do. You're not free to withhold money to the government, even while they do not represent you. You're not free to withhold your taxes while your business is closed. And you're not free to withhold your business rates while your business is closed.
There was something else announced recently. All the companies out there who haven't been able to claim business rate relief aren't going to be able to appeal it.
And they've been forced to pay for this while their businesses have been closed, right?
Exactly. Once again, their business has been shut down, or at the very least scaled all the way back to bare bones. They're still having to pay the government their pound of flesh.
I wonder at what point everyone else will realise what we already do. That this whole lockdown has been a money-making scam on a scale never before seen. How many politicians have been involved in these PPE scandals and hand wash and God knows what companies are just popping up, and then you find out they're all connected to the government, they're all relatives of the government or they're friends of theirs. It's ridiculous. And they've got the police just shutting you down when you protest.
It would be really, really, really interesting to go through that document that they have to submit. All politicians have to do this. I can't remember what it's called in this country, but if we could go through those documents and see where their personal interests lay and then how much wealth they've generated out of this.
Oh yes,
I reckon that a lot of them have made a serious amount of money.
Of course they have.
I can't think what the hell that body's called.
I know what you mean. I don't know what it's called. I only really know about...
It's not the expenses. My brain has died. I will come to this in a moment. That's going to annoy me.
But yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean, coming back to the police, I mean, this has all been ridiculous. You know, we know about common purpose. We know that the police have been heavily recruiting from parts of society that are already quite hateful. We know that they have... Well, you just need to see how they're treating people. Utter contempt for people's freedoms. Utter contempt even for peaceful protests. They go in with batons. They just do not care. They do not care about your freedoms. They would care about your freedoms if they had to abide by the same rules that they are enforcing. But of course they have those freedoms. Does anyone remember that video I put up? It was on one of our live streams about the police officers sitting in a food court enjoying some lunch.
Oh, that was amazing.
When a brave member of the public challenged them. Yeah.
That's possibly my favourite lockdown video. That guy, he lived the dream. For anyone who hasn't seen it, I'll describe it. This fellow, he was in a service station, motorway service station. And he saw these 4 coppers sitting around a table eating.
No masks.
No masks, no social distancing, nothing at all. And he went up to him, he started filming them. I don't even think he said anything, did he? Or did he? No, I think he
did ask them how they could enforce this rule for others and not engage with it themselves, or words to that effect.
Yeah, and they got really upset, and they all stood up and started walking towards him in that very menacing way that the police do.
Yeah, trying to intimidate him.
Yeah, that guy lived the dream. Absolute legend.
I was genuinely worried for him. Honestly, they were so menacing when they stood up. It's just ridiculous what they...
But once again, why is it nobody else there did anything? Other people should have joined in and started having a go at them. You know, if 6 or 7 geezers are sitting down at a table, see that and then step up and say, wait a minute, he's got a point, this fellow with the camera. You lot are misbehaving, push your name and numbers. You know, it puts a stop to it.
Because people are afraid.
We are afraid, and this is the bloody problem. We need to start being the rod for their own bloody back. Every single time a copper does something out of line, we should pull them up on it. I have long complained about this to family. I think there should be a special police unit, which is not a police unit as such, but just normal people, who drive around, and every time they see a copper do something illegal on the road, they should be able to pull them over and arrest them.
Well, you can make a citizen's arrest.
You can make a citizen's arrest. Arresting a copper is not the easiest thing in the world, but just we should be able to do this, because so many times you will see a copper, he's in the wrong lane, he's at a roundabout, he's doing something, he is breaking the law. Doing what he's doing, he's breaking the law. We should be able to pull him over and say, not good enough, you're arrested, mate.
Yeah.
And I think we should start bloody well doing it.
Well, it's interesting when the police break the law and they get caught. It's interesting the way they're treated.
Yeah, always much softer.
Like they might lose their job, but they don't always face the same consequences that non-police officers would.
I will say as well, if you do ever pull a copper over, get him breathalyzed.
Yeah.
I don't know how relevant that is these days, but once upon a time that used to be the thing. If you're ever pulled over by one, just get them breathalyzed. Just have a look, because especially certain police stations, anyway, they were well known for drinking on duty.
We'll just do it anyway, because if they refuse, that can go in your report. Resisting arrest. Just saying. We're not encouraging anyone to take risks or put themselves at risk.
No, but we need to start pushing back. If we see them do something that isn't right, like that geezer saw them sitting at the table, even though no one else is allowed to sit at the tables and all of that stuff, pull them up. Just say, no, excuse me, you're not allowed to do that. Leave.
We need to start acting like the communities we used to be. The reason why people are afraid is because people are essentially isolated. Mm-hmm. And we don't know that anyone is going to stand with us when we make a stand. We've got to start getting used to this idea. If someone makes a stand and you are aware of exactly what they're doing and you have no ethical problems with what they're doing, stand with them. Stand with them. We've got to stop being afraid of these people. These people are tyrannical. They do not have your best interests at heart. They are not protecting you. They are all about themselves. They're protecting their jobs and their future and their pension. But you won't get a pension. They're making sure that they do.
Exactly. That is all these people are doing. They are collaborators at the end of the day.
Yes, they are. Filthy, disgusting collaborators. Because when things really hit the fan, any of these police officers at any given time must have family that are affected by the rules they are enforcing. Mm-hmm. Do you think they're enforcing these rules on their own family? I would argue they're not. But what if another police officer tries to? Then what? The old boys club will kick in, right? I'll give him a pass. Come on, that's my brother. Or that's my dad, or that's my mum, or whatever. It's hypocritical. And these people are not going to help you when things get really bad. I mean, really bad, as in way worse than they are now. This is happening now, just as we're about to leave one lockdown. What do you think is going to happen with regard to these lockdowns if they are doing this now? So you can come out of lockdown, but you can't protest. You soon won't be able to go anywhere because of the COVID passports, or do anything, or access anything you need to. This doesn't act like a police force moving towards the end of a lockdown to me. What does it say to you, Jordan?
As I said earlier on, they're becoming more and more like the Praetorian Guard. They basically just become the dictator's plaything.
Yes. Puppets.
Exactly.
That phrasing they use, failure to comply, that sounds like a dystopian sci-fi movie.
That entire video just strikes you as something out of Blade Runner. Or that general sort of thing, that futuristic, dystopian sort of thing. You expect to see the coppers all dressed in black with their little riot boots on and their riot leggings and all of that stuff, dressed up like RoboCop. That's what you expect to see. That's what these people are acting like.
And if we don't come together and start disengaging from this system, this is the future we'll inherit. This is the future our children will inherit. They won't have any rights. They won't be able to defend themselves. You can't even have a conversation with a police officer now. A calm conversation where you explain very calmly what you were doing and why you were doing it, and expect a reasoned response. It's
Whenever
all
you
threats
see
now.
videos of that sort of thing, the coppers have been trained how to speak to you in a way that winds you up the most.
Yep.
Because a part of me believes they want some pushback against them. But when you see how coppers talk to people, when they're in their own private homes and they're the ones who've broken in, and make no mistake about it, they've broken into people's homes to have a go at them. The way that they talk to them is if you are some sort of detritus that has washed up off the beach and have accidentally trod in it.
Yes.
How dare you speak to me in this way? I'm explaining to you what the problem is. I can't speak if you're interrupting me. Things like that.
Yeah, incredibly arrogant.
I don't need you to speak. I'm telling you this is my home. I'm telling you to leave. End of story, end of discussion. There is no more. Get out.
Well, this is another thing that's very concerning. In the good old days, when we still had the illusion of freedom, police officers needed a piece of paper to enter your home. And it's called a warrant. And I'm sure everyone has watched television, everyone's watched cop shows and things, and you know exactly what a warrant is. It is a piece of paper, it's authorisation essentially, signed off by a judge to authorise that police officer or officers to enter premises, an address. And a warrant is specifically to either search for a person or a thing, usually. Since COVID lockdowns have occurred, police officers are not using the warrants anymore. They're not even pretending. There is no need for a warrant. I don't know when that legislation was passed. I suspect it never has been. But people are afraid and they believe everything they're told. So they come into your home without a warrant on the basis of some jumped up paltry excuse and frighten you and try and intimidate you in your own home. So
the problem is they have such a vast, sweeping mandate. Like they're allowed to enter your home if they've been told that there's other people in there.
Yeah.
Or if they have reasonable suspicion. Like, what does that even mean?
It means if they get a feeling, they can walk into your home.
Yeah, if their spidey senses are going off when they've walked past your front door, that's complete and utter nonsense.
And there's no burden of proof, so they literally can just decide to walk into your home. And this is the point I'm coming to. One of the most basic freedoms of any kind of liberal democracy is private property. Private being the key word.
But that's not just liberal democracy, that is the cornerstone of any function in society.
Well,
but we have the saying, an Englishman's home is his castle.
Not anymore. Well, that is, it might still be your castle, but now the drawbridge is never up and the moat's empty. And the only way, again, to protect yourself from this is to be an active part of your community. When this happens to you, you are going to need people who will stand with you and for you. People who will document what happens to you. People who will be there as witnesses. They cannot be allowed to get away with what they're doing. But they will continue to get away with it while we stand isolated and alone. Because individually, we are no match for them. Collectively, as communities, we can more than hold our own. We can argue with them, and they will listen. They will listen when it's a group of people. If you outnumber them, they will stop and they will listen. Mm-hmm. And most situations can be diffused, and they will back away. Well, they'll probably tell you they're backing away.
It happens all the time with the gypsies.
While they're calling for backup, but they just...
It happens...
Go on, sorry.
It happens all the time with gypsies. Whenever they're called into their campsites, they just gather around and basically block the police out. The police are unable to go and get who they need to get. I have a friend who's a paramedic, and she was called out to one of their campsites. This fellow had been shot, apparently, and it took them 4 hours, and I think she said something like 13 coppers turned up with guns.
Wow.
They weren't messing around. They were ready to go, and it took them 4 hours, and the coppers were seen off, even though the fellow was shot. He was shot. He was in pain, but he was fine. He was being treated, but not by the paramedics. I'm not sure if she was actually able to treat him. But yeah, it does happen.
I mean, I don't know if that's the way to go, but all I know is if we carry on acting as though we're on our own, we're going to be on our own.
I don't think it is the way to go exactly, but just the general...
The perception of it.
Yeah, the general gist. Like, if the coppers turn up at your neighbour's door, go out and have a look. Like, properly go out and have a look. Stand at the end of their garden. When they tell you to move on, just say no.
Ignore them and ask your neighbour if they're okay. Do they need any help?
Completely blank the copper. Don't play their games. Don't move. That's the big thing that they do. They use their body and their weight and their size and their general appearance. Because even though they're very small people, typically, they wear those massive stab-proof jackets, which makes them look about 3 times bigger than they are.
Yeah, well, that's if they can get them done up.
Look like little barrels. But they use their size and their shape and their general presence and posture to start moving you around. If you pick a spot and you just kind of stick onto that, there's not much they can do.
Thing is, at the moment...
Look them in the eye as well.
They're threatening to arrest everyone who doesn't basically comply with what they say. That is tyranny. Due process has gone out the window. But they will not do this with large gatherings. They will not do this with large groups. And we would never advocate for anyone to be aggressive or hostile or violent. But what we're saying is you've got to be able to protect yourselves. You've got to. And even if it's just the illusion of strength in numbers, it may make a difference. It at least will stop them from engaging in their unlawful business.
Exactly. Well, can you imagine? You've turned up to arrest someone, even rightfully. But let's say he's a murderer or something, I don't know. You've turned up to arrest him, it's you and your mate, and then you go into the house, you come out, and there's half the street there watching you. That's going to be pretty uncomfortable. You're not going to like that very much. So then when you go to do it again, that's going to be in the back of your mind.
Yes.
And then if it happens again, suddenly you're really going to start thinking, wait a minute, something is going on here. People are actually paying attention to what we're doing. They're not just idly standing by anymore. They're not just getting out the way when I turn up. They're actually standing their ground.
People are angry.
They're getting in our way a little bit.
Yeah,
people aren't happy. This is different. I don't like this very much. You know what? I think maybe I'm going to get a different job. That's what will start happening. That's how we can start chipping away at them.
Yeah, because it's not enough to sit online and tell everyone how unhappy we are about things. We're preaching to the choir, aren't we? We're telling each other, and we all agree. This is why your community is important, because if all you have is your online community, when these things happen to you, what can we do?
We're not going to be able to do much.
We can't come to you. We probably won't know your real name or where you live. We can't physically get to you in the time that your neighbours could get to you. You need real life communities. You need to show that you're not isolated and alone. You know what they say about in the wild, where you've got lions chasing a herd? They wait for the stragglers. They pick off the ones who are left behind. They pick off the weaklings or the weak links. Do not be that weak link. Do not be the person who is apart from everyone else. Because when it comes time for you to deal with that, no one will stand for you. And that's an awful thing to contemplate. It's really important that you are a part of your community, that people know when something happens to you. It's all about compromise and give and take, but you've got to be an asset to your community. You've got to be valuable to your community. And that's on each and every one of us.
Let me finish.
Oh, you let me finish.
God dang it. Stop it or I'll have you arrested. While we may be sitting here now and, we're not at any risk of the police. I very much doubt anybody listening is. Going forward, we have no idea what sort of laws and legislation they're going to pass. We have no idea how strongly they're going to start cracking down on it. They already have hate speech, which is incredibly broad. Basically, anyone who's offended by something can claim legally that somebody has committed hate speech against them.
Yes, it's down to someone's perception.
Exactly, then the police get to go and investigate. It's so wide-ranging, it's so broad, and while it isn't affecting us at the moment, in the future it might. And it may not be in the next year or two, it may not be in the next 10 years, but eventually it could. And especially as we get closer and closer and closer to maximum control from these collaborators and their cronies, or whichever date it is you want to pick, there's plenty of them. As we get closer to that, they're going to start becoming more and more and more strict. They're going to start cracking down harder on more and more things. That's when we're going to need this. At this moment in time, things aren't great. Things are about as good as they're going to be for a long, long, long while. This is the high watermark for where we're going.
Yeah.
So we need to start using this time, recognise this isn't the end by any means, and start building up, start gathering.
This is our preparation time.
Gathering resources. Exactly, preparation time.
We cannot afford to waste it. We just can't.
Yeah, we're like bears heading into winter.
Yeah, be the ants, not the grasshopper. Because honestly...
What the hell does that...
It's a kid's fable. The grasshopper basically... Okay, it's a little interesting story for you. So the ants worked all summer, gathering acorns and nuts and various things, yeah, and took them back to the little nest, and they prepared for winter, and they had all their food, and they knew that winter was going to be harsh and it was going to be too cold for them, so they did all the work through the summer. The grasshopper laid on his backside, basically playing music and just, doing nothing.
Being a cool dude.
Being lazy and watching the ants go back and forth, doing all the work, did nothing to help them, did nothing to help himself. I'm assuming it's a him. It always looks like a male in the cartoons and in the stories. Anyway, point is, winter comes, grasshopper realises he is absolutely in trouble, goes and knocks on the ant's door, and they take him in. I don't know what the moral of this story is you can be lazy and you're going to be forgiven. I would have been a bit harsher myself. But basically, the ants take him in.
That doesn't sound like an Aesop's fable.
No, if it was Aesop's fable, they probably would have eaten the grasshopper or something. But
Aesop was a brutal lad.
But the point is, he wasted all that time while they were preparing, and when it came to it, he was at risk. They were not. They worked together and they got a lot done. He kept himself separate, did nothing, and when the time came to all disappear for the winter, they all went off together. They all stuck together. He was left outside alone in the cold. So it's actually a really good analogy, even though it's a really morally rubbish story. The moral of that story is you can literally get away with doing nothing and someone will still take you in. Terrible thing to teach children, really. They should teach that the grasshopper dies out in the cold, but there you go. So yes, Don't be the grasshopper, be the ants. Work with your community, make it safer and stronger. And then you may never get to untouchable, but you'll get closer to it than anyone else.
That was a good ending, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Right, on that note, we will say good night. We will say that we're back tomorrow at 7:30. We hope to see you there. We will say thank you, everyone who's tuned in. If you have any comments on tonight's topic, please feel free to drop them below. And we would love to read them. If you have any other videos or insights, any other opinions you want to give, feel free to do so. Obviously, be sensible. We're not advocating for any kind of violent uprising or any silliness like that. We're talking about protection and defence, as always.
Yeah, common sense measures
Yes.
that we can realistically take, not fantasy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So, we've got to... We can put together a defence, but let's keep it based in reality. And let's make sure that we don't create more problems for ourselves by doing silly things. I know you all know better than that, but for anyone watching for the first time, we do not advocate for those things. Always about protecting ourselves, protecting our community, and making things generally better, not worse. So, yes, I think on that note, we will say goodnight. Thank you all for stopping by, and we'll see you soon.
Indeed. See you tomorrow.
Bye for now.